So can I start by just asking a couple of questions? How many people here have been or currently are a member of a revolutionary organization? Okay.
Wow.
How many people have been or currently are a member of a revolutionary organization?
Have been in the past as well.
Yeah.
We're a majority.
Yeah.
I think it depends what you mean by revolutionary.
Well, I was going to say self-identifying, knowing that there might be a lot of criticisms as to what revolutionary actually means, but I think that kind of gives a really broad, interesting spectrum about the people here and the conversation. Thanks to Tom, I learned a lot during that discussion, and I hope we can explore a lot of the themes in the discussion moving forward as well. My second question was how many people have heard of IOPS, or the International Organization for Participatory Society? Really long, horrible name. Okay. Interesting, thank you. So, thinking about the title of this discussion, I was trying to think of the key characteristics that, for me, a revolutionary organization would have. And for me, some of the things that really stood out was a radical process, and I think that Tom spoke about democracy, something that I might label as self-management, which is kind of a form of direct democracy. Radical action, some kind of common platform, which for people that are members of IOPS is kind of very generic, a commitment to anti-capitalism, anti-authoritarianism, anti-racism, anti-sexism, but also a commitment to certain values like self-management, diversity, ecological stewardship, internationalism, and concepts of equity and justice. And seeking to address all forms of oppression, again, something that Tom mentioned, not just oppression on the basis of class and forms of ownership, but oppressions that are rooted in your gender, your sexuality, your age, your ethnicity, however else you identify, whether you're able-bodied or not, and really seeks to identify all forms of oppression without prioritizing one form of oppression above any other. And doing that not just in a vision for a future society that we're working towards, but internally in the structure of the organization. We're all members that live in a really nasty world, and so when we come into revolutionary organizations, we bring into that the baggage of the world that we live in. And I think it's really important that revolutionary organizations have in place forms of structure that create spaces for people to be conscious of and have space to undo forms of oppression that we've all internalized. And one of the other characteristics that I was thinking of was a broad vision, not a dogmatic vision, but I'll maybe touch on that later, a vision for a future society. So the idea of a commitment to radical process and radical action really takes a lot from the feminist movements in the 60s, where this really came into focus and was developed through that time and has been continually developed since. But it's, as I said, not just a commitment to addressing forms of racism or sexism, but also classism, and so having forms where you don't have particularly educated people making decisions about how the organization is run, but a commitment to education and consciousness raising within the organization so that everybody in it is equally able to participate in decision making. And I did differentiate self-management from direct democracy. It's just a difference between kind of wanting complete consensus-based decision making on the one hand, on the other, having a commitment to people being able to make decisions to the extent that they're affected by them. So if there's a kind of a project within an organization or a front within an organization responsible for a certain campaign, the people in that project or front are responsible for the decisions in that campaign, and you're not obligated all the time necessarily to go to big general assemblies and have consensus on all decisions that are made within an organization. So that's kind of the radical process and self-management I was talking about. And again, speaking of radical process, there's been a lot of discussion over the past day about what will happen in Venezuela. And for me, one of the things that I think, regardless of which of Chavez's platforms and initiatives go forward, will always remain is the beginnings of participatory democracy in workplaces and neighborhood councils and assemblies that did begin to some extent. It wasn't perfect, but created spaces for real people to engage in real issues affecting them in their daily lives and feeling empowered to change them. And that, for me, again, is that commitment to radical process, which continues regardless of whether a strong leader or a particular group stay within an organization or as a head of state or not. Radical action is kind of tricky because most of the actions that we probably all engage in, if we think of social movements today, are really quite reformist. If we're honest, we might be members of groups that are trying to fight debt or stop a mine from opening or fight austerity, whatever it is. They're reformist campaigns, and we're probably participating in these campaigns with people from a diverse spectrum of political backgrounds. And I think having a commitment to building grassroots struggles, really putting the focus on the grassroots struggles as being the vehicles for long-term change, is crucial and a part of the radical process and in radical action, so that we're participating in movements for short-term improvements in maybe pensions being retained within a particular workplace, etc., that really improve the lives of people and give a sense of agency that we can fight for more. And so having a long-term vision of radical action moving forward, and not being sectarian in those grassroots movements, but really thinking about participating in whatever movements we're participating in and having autonomy within those movements, but solidarity within those autonomous movements. And I think for me, what that is about is maybe bringing some space within movements for consciousness raising for how single issues campaigns relate to other issues, and really expanding the spectrum of what it's possible to fight for, and hoping that by going through processes of winning certain things, people realize that state actors and their employers really don't have their best interests at heart and can start thinking about other struggles that they might want to win. So again, having that, I guess, longer-term approach to radical action, but also really thinking about consciousness raising within movements. For me, participating in movements in an ethical way, not seeking to lead them, but really participating to build the movement for the cause of whatever that grassroots struggle is, because that's why people have come together. That's the aim of that particular movement, or the reason that people have come together to struggle. And so there's an ethics, I think, to the way in which revolutionaries organize within grassroots struggles. The other thing that I wanted to say is the importance of building now alternative institutions as well. And people kind of get scared at the word prefigurative politics, but it's really just about building institutions now that do embody the values of a world that we want, and not thinking that that in itself is sufficient for radical change, but really valuing, thanks Joanna, the importance of having spaces where people can experience different ways of doing things. And I think Greece is a prime example where you've seen different experiments of clinics and spaces and horizontal kind of relationships between consumers and producers, while at the same time people are fighting and participating in building movements. So doing both together and really putting the focus on grassroots struggles rising up to eventually perhaps form some kind of counter power that can seek to take and transform state power. But really that focus being on the bottom up end, because Joanna waved a little wrap up at me, I won't go on. I hope that was interesting.